Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org for the week of January 30th, 2016. Commercial-free news hour. This is broadcast throughout Northern California Saturday mornings, 6 to 7 a.m. on KQMS. Commercial-free because I don't want this message to be tarnished with any other unpertinent commercials or data. A lot of news to cover today, as always. Far too much to get in an hour, but I'll do my best. Again, the circus of insanity unfolds around us at an astounding pace. It's almost impossible to keep up with. Again, too much to cover in this show because so much is unfolding. But after a few headlines from the corporate media spin machine, I'll go over some real frontline issues. I'll also cover what can only be described as a psychological epidemic in our society, an epidemic that is the core cause of what has brought us to this dark place that we now find ourselves in. And I know a lot of people reject that. They want to put the rose-colored glasses on. Those glasses won't stop the impacts that are coming. So take them off and look at reality. I was involved in an on-air debate of sorts on January 23rd, a week ago. The individual I debated with is a textbook example of the epidemic that I'll outline later in this broadcast. Anyway, a short rant first, if I may, then I'll get on to headlines and so forth. Where does one start with addressing the insanity week in and week out? This is my life and many of our lives that are trying to deal with this issues we face for the common good. I've been trying to sound the alarm for so long now that the memories of my life before this battle have become very distant and faint. And I spent a number of years working in the forest, restoring habitat on a significant scale, an industrial scale really. Irresponsible logging had completely altered the forest composition with saw crews and steel-tracked Caterpillar specialized brush removing skid steer tractors. I worked clearing the understory and fire-safing the land in my area on the east side of Lake Shasta for one purpose, to regenerate the land. I actually received help from USDA and CAL FIRE for this, which I'm grateful for this habitat restoration, which I was able to supervise, again, because it's on my own land next to Lake Shasta in Northern California. I have many exceptional memories of working alone, burning large fires of cleared brush, very large fires, late into the night on rainy and misty nights, alone, and knowing that the now cleared understory of the forest would provide a much better habitat condition for the wildlife. Very gratifying work. And my wish would have been to work in the forest for the rest of my days, to restore it, to see it thrive. This was not to be for me. This battle that I was faced with is changed my life, but we must learn, all of us, to embrace what appears to be the correct path. We must each make such a decision for ourselves. And the tribalism and groupthink should be abandoned. Unfortunately, these two factors are still ruling the day in most cases. Around the globe, global alliances are being formed in the continuing descent toward total global economic conflict and chaos. And the power structure's last cards are being played. We are reaching endgames around the world, and there will be great changes soon, one way or another. The total propaganda and political idiocracy, again, being pumped out by the mainstream media weapons of mass deception and distraction, truly beyond comprehension and worse by the day. And for the record, anyone that feeds from the mainstream media trough for your information, you have no idea what's really going on in the world. Maybe that's offensive to you, but it's simply a fact. If you feed for your information from mainstream media, if this is your source of information, and you think you know what's going on in the world, you don't. And you'll soon enough find out the hard way just how blind you were. Again, more on this later in the show. To the news, first, I strive to view information from as many sources as possible, all during the day when I'm at my workstation and trying to research and put articles together and communications. I keep media going around me so that I can catch bits and parts and pieces from many different sources. I caught a short clip of a show on the Glenn Beck channel recently titled, quote, Ammo and Attitudes. That says a lot of the mentality of that show. This is a program pushing the theme of arming everyone and teaching them to, quote, survive, or so they say. But I would ask this, how much good will your guns and your ammunition and your attitude do you, and your provisions, if our planet ends up damaged to the point where it will no longer support life? All that training, all those guns, all that ammunition will do you no good at all. Such a theme, again, is in the realm of the disorder, the mental disorder, which I will cover later in this news broadcast. Let's get to some real news now. I'm going to go through this rather quickly because I have a lot of data to try to cover. Here's some real headlines. I'm going to blow through this fairly quickly, so just try to follow the headlines. I'm just giving you a snapshot of what's going on around the globe. These are from ricefarmer.com, or ricefarmer.com, ricefarmerblogspot.com. If you search Rice Farmer, you'll find a great news site at the top of that list. No politics, no advertising. A few headlines. Europe bank rout erases $434 billion, twice the Greek economy. OPEC economies on their last legs. Brazil's deepening slump. Stark evidence that statists Keynesian economics don't work. Goldman Sachs warns Brazil economy will worsen amid rising inflation and political corruption. Fiat Chrysler, 200 plant to shut 6 weeks on slack demand. Caterpillar warns equipment sales still falling. Cat is really falling off a cliff. Capital controls are coming. Another headline, rush for the exits, why China's capital flight carnage will continue. Another headline, Alberta loses most jobs in 34 years as oil crunch cripples labor market. How many of these headlines do you see on our mainstream media that show us Trump and Cruz and Clinton and all the other idiots in the political theater? You don't see much of this, do you? Let me finish a few more headlines just to give you an idea what's going on around the world. Germany has repatriated over 366 tons of gold from New York and Paris. The global powers are preparing. Make no mistake about it. They're preparing for what's coming, and it is coming. People's Bank of China may buy 215 tons of gold this year, Barclays forecasts. Another headline. Samsung forecasts tough year ahead as smartphone sales dip. Another, Houston feels the oil price pinch as office space vacancies grow. The economy's not growing or thriving. Only vacancies are growing and thriving. The facade is breaking down by the day. If you don't believe it, you will. Wait and see. Singapore's 2015 employment grows at weakest pace in 12 years, and we know the employment figures are falsified around the globe. It's much worse than we're told. About half the university graduates in Nigeria can't find jobs. Layups loom in the dry freight market. I've gone over that week after week. Global dry shipping is virtually at a standstill. Can't hide that for very long. A couple more headlines. Yahoo to shut Argentina and Mexico offices. Gargantuan next generational bust is coming on a lot of fronts. That's a headline by itself. Another Caterpillar headline. Caterpillar fourth quarter sales miss tumbled 23%. Saudi Arabia hemorrhages $19.4 billion in reserves during December. Saudi Arabia, our staunch ally. Saudi Arabia, who is bombing innocent civilians in Yemen. Saudi Arabia, who beheads political dissenters and hangs them from cranes. And these are our partners. These are our allies. Saudi Arabia, who had 93 nationals flown back to Saudi Arabia after 9/11 with no interrogations whatsoever. How many odors about 9/11 do we need before we know the official story was complete nonsense and garbage? Final headline, steel industry, China glut leaves POSCO with first net loss, sinks others. The steel industry is crashing. Industrialized civilization is in its death throes. Again, those that don't believe it, those that believe the lies, and the whole system and those within the system are completely committed to that system. They're committed to the lie. They're so invested in the lie that they can't tell the truth now. They can't. Doesn't matter whether they're a stockbroker or anybody else who's dependent on the cancerous machine that's ground up the planet, the military industrialized complex that's part of climate engineering. They're all committed to the cancer. So almost no one is willing to step forward and tell the truth because they're all too invested in the lie to turn back. But the truth will be faced soon, period. Again, citizens of the world, most especially in first world countries and populations, Western countries, are about to find out the hard way the true cost of global GDP. That's gross domestic product, which has been produced for industrialized civilization by nature for free. 75% of all global GDP has been produced by nature for free, but no longer. Nature is imploding. We've all but destroyed our planet in the geologic blink of an eye. And even now, so few are willing to face reality and try to change directions. I get a great deal of blowback from many sources about my dark reporting, about my doom and gloom. And my reply to that blowback, if you will, is this. The truth is the truth. People's propensity to ignore it or gloss over it is, again, a primary reason why we have already gone so far off the cliff. At the end of presentations, I can sense in some audience members that they're waiting for me to say, just do A, B, and C, and everything will go back to the way it was. This is a lie. I won't say it. I can't say it. Half-truths are not truths. There's only the whole truth. A boat will not float if it's halfway watertight. No, it will sink. On to other truths in the weather for a moment. Winter storm Jonas that I reported on some last week. Absolute engineered winter weather theater. It was almost hard to watch the Weather Channel employees play this up day after day, even after the event, because that's what they're paid to do. And now, of course, as we expect, the weather whiplash occurs. Right back to record high temperatures in those regions. When will it dawn on people that the climate system is being forced past the breaking point, that's being engineered to a degree that can barely be comprehended? And those that don't believe it, those who choose to deny it, have simply decided to run from the truth. The data is there to confirm conclusively that climate engineering is going on. They're robbing rain from certain regions, using it to create the largest cloud cover they can. That's the goal of solar radiation management. So we see large flows of moisture pouring into the west coast that are heavily aerosolized. And those who don't think the weather has changed, you're simply forgetting the past, or you're choosing not to face reality. The weather in Northern California, where I live, couldn't be more different than when I moved here, when we had real storms that blew with dark clouds passing over and squalls of rain coming down. And now what do we get? A day or two before a storm is coming, we get the massive spraying. We get these massive areas of amorphous skies. Again, featureless, very little wind because the aerosols stop convection, and that alters wind patterns. It diminishes it greatly. And it migrates the moisture. We have science data to say conclusively, when you overseed cells of moisture, it causes those cells to migrate without dropping that precipitation. That's exactly what we see. We're relying on science for these conclusions. So, again, the weather is being engineered to a massive scale to try to continue the confusion and the division with the population as long as possible, so that they're fighting over whether it's warming or cooling, which is ridiculous at this point. The planet's not just warming, it's in total meltdown, and the only cooling we see is when they engineer a cool down. And in fact, although we've been told and lied to again that we should expect these extreme cool events with global warming, that too is a lie. You should expect warming with global warming. New study on that. I'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to go through a few mainstream headlines. I just want to make a point. With all that's going on in the world, this is what we get from mainstream media, and this is why if you watch mainstream media and it's your primary source of data, you don't know much. Surfer swallowed by a huge wave. Pop star's emotional song goes viral. Celine Dion's farewell to her husband. Who cares? America's favorite movie stars are... Question mark. Mainstream media hypocrisy. A little additional story here. Again, the hypocrisy on some of the mainstream media, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, beyond comprehension. So on, I believe, Fox today, and I watch all sources to see what the people are being fed, U.S. reporter Jason Rezaian was released from Iran. And they played this up so much on Fox as how horrible a treatment he got. He looked pretty well fed, I have to say that. He looked very well fed. So apparently the food was good in Iran. How do you compare whatever he went through, that he apparently was put in solitary confinement for a short time or something? And I'm not condoning what Iran did. I don't know why he was locked up, and I'm not saying it was right. But I'm saying for Fox News to broadcast that, completely ignoring Guantanamo, where we locked up how many people with no charges whatsoever for decades, waterboarding them and doing whatever else we did to them, torturing them. How deep can the hypocrisy go? I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to be a part of it. I refuse to be a part of it. I refuse to pretend it's okay, because it's not okay. How many countries did Obama bomb so far? 7 countries. That sounds like aggression. Who's Iran bombed? Not just in the last 8 years of Obama's presidency. How many countries has Iran invaded in the last 200 plus years? Zero. We don't see that in the news very much. Find out what's going on around you. Again, if you're buying into the mindless propaganda and blind patriotism that you're fed on mainstream TV, you've abandoned your sense of reason, you've abandoned your sense of morality. There's none so blind as those who refuse to see, as the saying goes. Back to some real news again. Breaking news as of January 28th. Quote, from one of the attorneys on the well in Southern California, they may have entirely lost control of the field involved in the LA gas disaster, and it's coming up everywhere. We learned there's many other leaks. This is just beginning. Just like the Macondo well in the Gulf of Mexico that's likely still leaking. And what happened to the world's recognized independent expert on deep sea drilling when he went on CNN News and stated what they did not want him to say? This is Matt Simmons. You can look this story up. In fact, I ask anybody to look any story up that I bring up. Look anything up. Verify it. Don't want you to believe me. Matt Simmons went on CNN News after the Macondo well was supposedly plugged, and he stated it's not plugged. Oil's still leaking through the seafloor. They'll probably never plug that well. He was dead several days later in his swimming pool. Coincidence? I doubt it. By the way, on the weather, had a Weather Channel meteorologist suicided this week. Very interesting circumstances. Was he willing to talk? Was he about to talk? And those who think this is all conspiracy, again, those who want to ram their heads in the sand, and those who have the psychological condition that I'll outline later in this broadcast, I would ask you this: if there's nothing to hide, why has the federal government put a gag order on all National Weather Service and all National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration employees? Why? Answer me that. Why? Let's get on to a little more news. The doomsday clock has now been put to 3 minutes before midnight. The doomsday clock, the symbolic countdown to humanity's end, remains stuck on the brink of the apocalypse for a second year Tuesday because of the continued existential threats posed by nuclear war and climate change. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, the group which created the clock, said it was keeping the clock hands set to 3 minutes before midnight. This is simple reality. It's simple math. If you graph out the current trajectory of the human race and the current trajectory of the biosphere destruction, if we stay on this course, we're not going to be around much longer. That's a mathematical fact. So those who want to, again, listen to George Bush, just go shopping and pretend that the streams are full of fish and the trees are all healthy and there's lots of seals all over the coast, even though we have reports of, 10 or 15,000 dead seals on certain locations alone, and 100,000 dead birds just washed up on the shores of Alaska, whales everywhere, dead fish everywhere, species lost at 200 to 300 species a day going extinct. If you want to pretend that that's all okay, you're going to find out what reality is soon enough. Another headline, back to ISIS. Again, as the walls close in and the power structure tries desperately to use the tools it has manufactured in order to help control populations, we have ISIS. Another headline, Israeli defense minister says ISIS funded with Turkish money. U.S., NATO, ally, Turkey. Turkish money, Turkey, who's buying the oil from ISIS. Again, you can't tell me our military, the most sophisticated, the most capable in the world, couldn't mop up ISIS any time they were allowed to. Here's another headline report to outline the continued insanity of the human race. While the environment's imploding, industrialized civilization is breaking down, we are continuing to flow what remaining resources we have into arms. This is an excerpt from an article in The Economist from January 23rd. The Barack Obama administration has $1 trillion plan to renew nuclear weapons. That's smart, isn't it? Really? $1 trillion on nuclear weapons. We already have enough nuclear weapons to exterminate life on Earth mathematically 12,000 times over, but we need to spend $1 trillion more. Replacement of the 14 Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines at about $140 billion for 12 new boats, $62 billion to replace the 440-strong Minuteman-class ballistic missile force. America's land-based force will be needed if of only as a sink, providing targets to absorb the nuclear strike. The new cruise missile at $10 billion, new version of the free-fall nuclear bomb called the B-61-12. In October, the Air Force awarded Northrop Grumman $55 billion in contracts to develop and build around 100 of the new long-range strike bomber, the LRSB, the principal carrier for the two weapons above. The new bombs have computerized guidance, maneuverable tail fins. Who cares, right? This is insane. I mean, this is what we're doing. We have Fukushima that may kill us all. If something else, a lot of things don't kill us first. We're building 60 more nuke plants around the world, times over, but we need another $1 trillion worth. Again, I hear people have said to me more times than I could count, this can't be happening. Why would those in power do this to themselves? How many examples do we need of those in power doing this to themselves? A little non-connected headline here that we often don't see. Argentina fights massive plague of locusts. Buenos Aires, farmers and fumigators in Argentina are running out of time as they scramble to control the country's worst plague of locusts in more than a half century. And you know what? With weather events and a lot of other things, mainstream sources always say it's happened before, even if it hasn't, because the population thinks if it's happened before, it must be okay, no big deal, I'll go on. We see this all the time, especially with weather events. They will claim that certain events have happened before, even though we see 500-year floods and 1,000-year floods every year. Somehow we're told it's happened before, and that tends to put the population back to sleep. Another headline, wind and solar records tumble as China and India accelerate energy transition. Renewable energy is not going to save us, and that's my background. I'm off-grid. I have wind, hydro, and solar. I have 3 wind turbines. I have 13 kW, 13,000 watts of solar power. It's not going to save us. It's simply an energy extender. And many of the chemicals used, I'm not saying it's not better than fossil fuel, it is, but those who think we're going to run out of fossil fuel and switch to renewables, you're not living in reality. Those who think that we can make some sort of, quote, energy transition and continue the party of industrialized civilization without crashing, you're not living in reality. So the bottom line is, these false headlines you see that this new technology and that new technology is going to save us, simply not reality. Now, back to a headline I mentioned earlier, and this is important to remember since we just had Winter Storm Jonas and we're likely to have another manufactured storm along the East Coast very soon. Very bizarre storms that have a warm side and a cold side that's never meteorologically existed before. So you have warm water pumped out of the Gulf of Mexico because they need a lot of moisture for these chemically nucleated storms. So we have thunderstorms and warm temperatures on one side of the quote winter storm and snow ice storms on the other. Listen to this headline. This is a recent study, and it's important to understand because we've been lied to that global warming will cause cold extremes too. Not reality. These cold extremes are engineered. Climate change does not cause extreme winters, new study shows. The report continues, cold snaps like the one that hit the eastern United States in past winters are not a consequence of climate change. Scientists at Zurich and California Institutes of Technology have shown global warming actually tends to reduce temperature variability. So where are these cold snaps coming from? It's called climate engineering and chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. We have the patents for this. We have the Chinese government admitting they were doing it, again, until they caused $1 billion worth of damage. So when your temperatures swing 50, 60 degrees in a single day, and your weatherman is telling you that's normal, he's lying. He's simply lying. In fact, how many people in the weather industry are lying right now and know they're lying, and does that have anything to do with the Weather Channel meteorologist that was just suicided? Was he going to talk? What about the gag order for National Weather Service and no employees? How many red flags do we need, truly? How many? And for those who say also, and I hear this a lot, that carbon is good for us. The more carbon, the better. Tell that to the fish. Here's a headline about carbon and the ocean. Lost at sea, fish getting drunk from rising carbon dioxide emissions. New report. Carbon dioxide concentrations in seawater could reach levels high enough to make fish intoxicated, many decades earlier than previously thought. That's because scientists are told, and they're all too willing to go along with it, to completely downplay the severity of what we face. That's why we're inches from hitting the wall as a civilization, and almost nobody understands this. So anyway, the fish are becoming intoxicated with too much CO2 many decades earlier than previously thought, with serious implications for the world's fisheries. UNSW researchers have found that carbon dioxide concentrations in seawater are reaching high enough levels to make fish intoxicated and disoriented, many decades earlier than previously thought, with serious implications for the world fisheries. Now, this is on top of the nuclear contamination. This is on top of geoengineering destroying the ozone layer, which is allowing intense UV radiation to slaughter global plankton stocks, which is crashing them right now. They're 50 to 60% down globally. We have oceans that are warming to a degree that's and stratifying, which means layering, not mixing, so they're deoxygenating. And that obviously causing mass fish die-off, and the warming oceans also releasing gases from the seabed, methane and hydrogen sulfide. That's killing fish also. It's coming from every direction. So again, for those that think everything's rosy, take off the rose-colored glasses and you'll see what it really looks like. The report continues, our results were staggering and have massive implications for global fisheries and marine systems across the planet, says lead author Dr. Ben McNeil of the UNSW Climate Change Research Center. High concentrations of carbon dioxide cause fish to become intoxicated, a phenomenon known as hypercapnia. Essentially, the fish become, quote, lost at sea. The carbon dioxide affects their brains and they lose their sense of direction and ability to find the way home. They don't even know where their predators are. This is on top of the fact that the acidic oceans are destroying other types of marine animals already. We have starfish washing up on beaches around the globe, dead. Whales, again, I could go on and on. The marine implosion is absolutely massive. Now, in regard to all this bad news, and those who would run for cover and say it's all nonsense, I don't want to hear as they're covering their eyes and their ears and pretending it'll all go away. Stockholm Syndrome. Many don't know what Stockholm Syndrome is. And pseudo-patriotism, because these two go together and they apply to, for example, the debate I had last weekend. So there's an excellent report here. I want to read through it quickly because I have a lot of ground to cover still. And it gives the listener an idea on what Stockholm Syndrome is and how it applies to populations, and especially the U.S. population in many regards. A government has the power. This is by a report by Harriet Elliott, by the way. My thanks to him. It's an excellent report. A government has the power in most cases to enslave us at a moment's notice for a war we may not support and to silence anyone who speaks ill of its military plans. It forces us to send our children to school, whether or not we approve of it. It forbids us from agreeing freely with an employer to work for less than a minimum wage. It tells us what we may and what we may not buy, sell, eat, drink, watch, smoke. drive, and consent to. Most concerning, it demands up to 40% of the money we make to fuel these acts of coercion and has the power to incarcerate and fine us if we refuse to pay up. One would perhaps expect, given we have come to value freedom and individuality, liberty, over the last century or so, that people would loathe the state. Yet, to the contrary, any effort to shrink its size or scope is met with indignation. It's hardly surprising that within the structure of the state, individuals seek to maximize their own political and economic interests. A lot of selfishness. That's how we got in this dark corner again. The report continues. Unfortunate though the results may be for the bankers and energy companies of this world, it is curious, however, that people not only support the process of the state, but also the entity of it. There appears to be something deeply embedded in the psyche that many would label, quote, patriotism. However, it is difficult to tell why somebody would feel patriotic to a state which has, does, and will deny its citizens vast swaths of rights, which persistently evades transparency measures, and which bullies people into paying for its services. Patriotism becomes even harder to explain when we consider just how arbitrary nationality is. We have no choice as to when or where we were born, so it seems odd that we should exhibit specific loyalty to the particular government within those borders we came to be in, especially when this loyalty also compromises actively fighting people from other nations. There is one particular psychological condition, however, which sheds some light on this quandary. It is named after a 1973 incident in which 4 hostages repeatedly sympathized with and sought to protect 2 bank robbers who had held them for nearly a week. In the last 40 years, a handful of more examples of the Stockholm Syndrome, that's what we're talking about here, Stockholm Syndrome, have occurred, each involving victims showing compassion to criminals, often in improbable and shocking circumstances. Psychological precedent would suggest that 4 conditions are required for Stockholm Syndrome to develop. First, the criminal must pose a serious threat to the victim. Second, the victim must be isolated from outside influences. Third, the victim must feel completely unable to escape his captivity or to defend himself. Fourth, the victim must feel that some compassion has been shown. This does not entail a bank robber offering burgers and cookies to a hostage, but simply means that the captors have not been as aggressive as they theoretically could have been. While Stockholm Syndrome is hard to pin down, owing to the panic of most situations in which it occurs and the rarity and range of its appearances, these 4 conditions remain fairly stable. The first 3 are necessary to trigger the primal response. Again, that's important to consider. It's a primal defense mechanism, Stockholm Syndrome, to which the phenomenon has been attributed. Victims must be powerless, at the mercy of an all-powerful assailant, and far away from others who can help. The 4th condition causes humans instinctively to believe that the otherwise bizarre behavior of capitulation, respect, and sympathy is the utility-maximizing action to follow. Stockholm Syndrome seems to be a long-forgotten evolutionary response to large-scale, overpowering threats. Think about that. Stockholm Syndrome seems to be a long-forgotten evolutionary response to large-scale, overpowering threats. A primitive defense mechanism. This is epidemic in our society. The denial of what's happening around us, no matter how obvious it is, no matter how threatening, no matter how dark the horizon, we have this primitive defense mechanism going off in people. Continuing, let us therefore try to link the 4 defining traits of Stockholm Syndrome to the situation of a citizen within a modern state. First, we must establish that the aggressor poses a threat to its victims. This is, in fact, precisely how the government functions. Every violation of the law is met with a series of powerful responses, up to and including life imprisonment. Indeed, if no overwhelming threat existed to citizens, they would have no incentive to obey laws. Second, we must show that the victims are disconnected from the outside world. In the context of government coercion, outside influences most accurately means people from other countries. However, it then becomes obvious why these outside influences fail to hold back Stockholm Syndrome. They are all also under the power of an oppressive state. This is uniformly true around the globe. Given that hostages exhibit Stockholm Syndrome, even alongside other hostages, it follows that this sort of external contact has no impact on the condition. Third, we have to show that citizens are unable to escape their captivity or to defend themselves against the force of the state. While constitutionalists like to protect the Second Amendment rights for fear of totalitarianism, it is reasonably self-evident that no individual has any hope of defending himself from a modern government. No denying that fact. This is arguably most true in the U.S., whose military spends more than every single other military in the world combined. I think it's the top 10 militaries is what they're referring to here, but imagine that. We spend more than the next 10 countries combined. Escaping to another country means nothing when the country is also an oppressor. And in regard to those that would defend the Second Amendment, I want to weave this into the Hammond event that just happened. I know some people were killed, and I hope if such a protest occurs again in the future, I think it's tragic that there were mortalities in that event, but I hope people who protest leave your guns at home. Do not bring your guns. That is exactly what those in power want you to do. Don't buy into that. Leave your weapons at home. They have no place in such a protest as that. And I hope we can avoid such an outcome in the future. And it would have gone much better had weapons not been brought to that protest. I want to continue with this report on Stockholm Syndrome and the epidemic it is with American populations and populations around the globe. Having plausibly satisfied these three burdens, our only task remaining is to show that the state the government exhibits some compassion towards citizens. Luckily, this is not difficult. The state furnishes children with free education, the unemployment with welfare, pensioners, guaranteed Social Security, everyone with roads, hospitals, other public services paid for in a significant part by a small portion of the population. Even if thousands of social services the government provides do not seem sufficiently charitable, we can look to political theorists who suggest that our present government is permissible because past states abused their power even more. So we accept the lesser of the evils, at least in the public mind. While saying that slavery's abolition magically makes income taxes legitimate is akin to arguing that carpet bombing London is acceptable because we could have launched a nuclear missile instead. This sort of discourse directly affirms that states could theoretically be less compassionate than they are at present and yet continue to function. In other words, with Stockholm Syndrome, if the victim perceives that they could be abused even more, this is the fourth trigger point for Stockholm Syndrome. And many people we know live in fear right now, don't they? How many people have I heard from that say, I would speak out about climate engineering and other issues, but I'm afraid. I'm simply afraid. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? If the ship is going down and you're on the ship, why wouldn't you make your voice heard while you can? Why wouldn't you try to help plug the leak and change the course of the ship while you still have a chance to do something? Final paragraphs of this report. The above suggests that Stockholm Syndrome may well exist in citizens towards their states. As a result, it is unsurprising to see the symptoms of such a condition in a society. People often ignore or actively deny how oppressive their government is, and disregard or rapidly override the harms of coercion when discussing the legitimacy of a particular policy or patriotism, or whichever term you would prefer, since the word has other meanings tied up with it. Is a rational response to an all-powerful subjugator, and once entrenched becomes hard to shed. Once these ideologies are adopted, once Stockholm Syndrome is ingrained, it's very difficult to break that paradigm, to break that programming, if you will. This all-powerful government father figure that people want to blindly go along with, if you will, no matter how tyrannical it becomes. Is this what built this country? This is the paradox. I hear people that claim to stand for the Constitution and that they want to stand on the principles that built this country, yet they don't behave in a manner that seems to back up what they're saying. They don't. They're not even willing to show up and peacefully, I use that word strongly, peacefully protest the fact that we're all being sprayed like rats from the sky. And there's no denying this. There's no denying. We have film footage of a crime happening. How do you deny it? We have undeniable film footage of these tankers spraying at altitude. We have lab tests to prove that this material is showing up in our air, water, soils. How can people pretend that's not going on? How can people pretend that what happened in Vietnam was right? We know now it was a false flag event. How can people ignore the 9/11 issue when you have 2,500 architects and engineers from around the world saying the official story is absolute nonsense? Again, I'll use Building 7 for an example. Who could rationally believe that a 47-structure steel high-rise building could collapse in 7 seconds, free fall speed, because of some furniture burning in the first floor? If you believe that, you need to seriously recheck your reality, because you have a very serious case of Stockholm Syndrome, that you are willing to blindly defend those that are actually tyrannically running the country of which you are a part of. The fact that this report finishes with this, the fact that the government seems to be an institution for good, not evil, is what makes this thesis so hard to believe. Yet, of course, that is precisely the point. Unnatural feelings of support for those within arbitrary borders and dislike for those without. Tribalism, I mentioned it earlier, this is tribalism. It's part of what's destroying the planet. Can only be explained as the product of a deep psychological phenomenon. Breaking free may be hard, even counterintuitive, but unless we do so, we risk being forever engulfed in blind obedience to a state that should command neither our will nor our support without first justifying its existence. This is the silent epidemic that has brought such darkness and destruction on the planet and all life. This tribalism that's rampant even today, that we can see hundreds of thousands of people showing up for a Super Bowl celebration game. And yet, who do we see protesting the atrocities that are happening around the globe right now? Where's any mention of that? To watch mainstream media and know what's really happening in the world is appalling. It stirs a sense of righteous anger inside that forces one to speak out. To speak out. It's our responsibility. It's not an option. It's an obligation. You can't look at your children and tell them you love them and ignore what's happening in the world. That will soon cost them their future. Period. This is a mathematical fact. It's not speculation. I mentioned at the beginning of this show that I had an on-air debate with an individual last week, and that I would argue exhibits all the traits of Stockholm Syndrome. I believe this encounter is important to understand, as it is a situation that is dealt with by all those that encounter fierce resistance and ridicule for attempting to share real and verifiable truths regarding real and verifiable threats that we must face collectively, or we will soon enough reach the end of the road. I look at comments from all over the world because of the news and data that's posted on geoengineeringwatch.org, from people who are anguishing because their own family, their own friends have disowned them or been alienated from their lives because they've simply tried to share the truth. I'll get to that in a moment more. I want to finish with this Stockholm Syndrome again, which is the psychological defense, primitive defense mechanism is psychologically described that causes an individual to defend their captors, to blindly defend their own governments, this sort of tribal mentality. My government, right or wrong. There's no morality in that. None. It's not what our founding fathers did. It's not what the Constitution is based on. No honor in that at all. The truth is the truth. There's either the whole truth or there's a lie. Period. To continue, again, a short elaboration, this debate, which I think is applicable to others and what they try to share with their family and friends, this debate that I was on was on the issue of geoengineering. I knew beforehand that this individual would likely be verbally abusive and slanderous. We all deal with this from certain people around us. This was indeed the case, but I was not willing to participate in that kind of behavior, as it's unproductive, it's very transparent, very telling, very revealing. Individuals that are deeply rooted in denial and exhibit the traits of Stockholm Syndrome, which I just described, the blind defending of certain illusions because it feels safer to their mental state. We get this kind of behavior. And generally, such people are very afraid of unpleasant realities at a very deep level. This needs to be considered. They will often rhetorically respond with repetitive ridicule to facts that they don't want to hear and are presented with. It's important to understand that. This is a defense mechanism again. In the case of this debate in question, every time I presented verifiable facts on the climate engineering reality, I was confronted with being called a liar, a death cult leader, with various rants about Bigfoot and mythical swamp rats as a comparison to the factual global geoengineering issue. And again, this is classic Stockholm Syndrome psychological defense mechanism. Most are unwilling to face the fact that their own government is spraying their skies with highly toxic materials which are contaminating every breath we take. Most are, at least so far, unwilling to examine the facts, which verify that our own government has formed, funded, and fueled terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Again, and these are tools of the power structure that are already being used and may be put to much greater use soon. Now ISIS is now invading Libya. Why are they invading Libya? Because our government helped to topple the legitimate government. I'm not saying Gaddafi was a great guy in many respects, but the surveys of former citizens of that country would do anything to go back to the way it was. Now we have total chaos, just like we have in Iraq, total chaos. And these are all the countries, again, that were part of the grand chessboard, which I brought up in shows months ago, the grand chessboard laid out by top advisor Brzezinski to our leaders, the grand plan to topple the Middle Eastern countries and take them over. It's exactly what's happened. This is not hard to figure out. It's not hard to connect the dots. This is the government we have that's now helping to, again, fund, fuel, arm Al-Qaeda, ISIS. Most are willing to face the fact that our military has sent countless sons, daughters, mothers, fathers to die in wars of occupation and aggression, all for the ultimate goal of gaining more power and control for the ruling elite. It's not about freedom. It's not about democracy. When you see the military recruiting commercials that are trying to literally program potential service personnel for what is in fact a lie, that this is what the U.S. military is doing around the world. And I care for our military brothers and sisters. Again, I've stated that over and over. I've given to DAV, I've given to VFW, I've helped rehab NAM vets, but I'm saying let's still face the truth. I salute your motives, but I'm asking you now to face the truth, to do the right thing, to do the responsible thing, to uphold your oath, to protect your countrymen from all threats, foreign and domestic. You have a responsibility. I'm simply appealing to our military brothers and sisters. I'm not against you at all. In fact, the population has no chance without you. No chance. The population of the United States has no chance against the dark forces that are now dismembering the planet and setting up for global conflict, which will, again, be our end if it happens. I'm asking you to show responsibility toward your countrymen. We need you. We have no chance without you. And for all those like my January 23rd debate opponent who are just too terrified to face reality, I would say this: denial will not make reality go away. Rather, it will only make threats manifest into an ever larger cancer. That's, again, how we got here. One final rant that the individual I debated kept repeating. He quoted me over and over as saying, the earth was past the point of no return to support life, which is not actually correct. Again, individuals that are operating in fear tend to hear what they don't want to hear, and then they tend to hold it over your head. What I've always stated, which I stand by now, is this. The planet is past the point of no return in regard to being the hospitable home we have all known. It's not coming back in any time frame that matters. Equilibrium periods after past events like this, like the Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum 55 million years ago, methane mass expulsion. What's happening now is happening much faster and appears to be much worse than that. There was an equilibrium period of 10 to 15 to 20 million years. That's a long time. So we're past the point of return to the planet we've known. And if we stay on this course, the planet won't support life much longer. That's a mathematical fact. It's not death cult. It's not some sort of fear-mongering. It's the truth. It's the truth. And those that don't want the truth simply throw mud because they have no defense against the truth other than baseless slander. So remember that when you're sharing the truth with people who respond in this way, they're simply petrified. They're afraid to face the truth. All you can do is plant a seed and move on. Doesn't do any good to get down in the mud with them. That will only make their condition worse. Just plant a seed and move on. So at the end of this conversation with this particular individual, he stated that we should take George Bush's advice. We should all go shopping. We should just go about our lives, that the environment where he lived was all in top form, the trees were healthy, the streams full of fish, that all I've tried to report was nonsense, and that common sense should tell us all that everything is wonderful, apparently. So it's interesting that since this particular exchange happened, the Northern California newspaper just published that 95% of the young salmon have died. 95%. The statistics are everywhere. 90% of global pelagic fish populations are gone. 50 to 60% of global plankton populations have died off. We've lost 3.4 trillion trees from around the globe since the dawn of modern man. 3.4 trillion, that's 55% of Earth's trees. Those who think that just because they can go buy a new car with nothing down and no payments and no interest, that everything's wonderful in the world, you're in for a wake-up call soon. In the words of world-renowned psychologist Dr. Scott Peck, the hallmark of a healthy mind is an unwavering willingness to face the truth, no matter how unpleasant or how dire. That's a healthy mind. So for all those that anguish with the rejection that they receive from friends and from family by their attempts to share the truth, I say this: take a good, long look in the mirror and consider that you're looking at the reflection of a mentally healthy and morally grounded human being. It takes great courage to try to face the opposition of your peers, your family, your friends, to risk alienation, which inevitably comes. I have not communicated with my only brother for 4 years, my mother, and a lot of former friends, because they don't want to hear the truth, and I don't want to have idle conversation. I don't. I have a responsibility to my children. My responsibility is to try with every fiber of my being to provide them some sort of a future. Again, it's not an option, it's an obligation. I don't own my life. I owe it to them. And not just them, every child around the world. And every frog, every bird, every tree, every part of the life support system of this planet that has given us a chance to experience our lives here. We have a responsibility. It's time we lived up to it. Don't lose heart. Continue to sow seeds of awareness to all those who are trying to share the truth. They'll soon be forced to sprout. Wait and see. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.
Bye.